Scott is the principal botanist and president of the Midwest Natural Resources, and much of his current professional focus involves rare plant surveys, native plant community mapping, and wetland-related efforts, including long-term vegetation monitoring. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in Botany from Iowa State University and a Master of Science degree in Biological Sciences from the University of Mississippi. And Jessie here has worked at MNR for over 6 years and currently serves as Vice President and Senior Data Manager. Jessie has assisted with the statistical design and data analysis of several vegetation monitoring projects since 2014. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Augustana College in Illinois and a Master of Science degree in Conservation Biology from the University of Minnesota. So welcome and thank you for being here today.
Well, thanks for everyone for showing up on a February day. So enjoy the work you got me. If you didn't get one or want more, come talk to me afterwards. So the outline today will be a brief overview of kind of the regionalization of the Floristic Quality Assessment. So we talked about the statewide, but we'll talk a little bit about the regionalization, and then we'll go into the actual case study following some recommendations for kind of lessons learned or some of the variables you may not be able to control when you go into a monitoring project. And tell me, please, if you can't hear me, or if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. So we have already begun to regionalize the Floristic Quality Assessment. Now, the difference here than the Minnesota State project that Jason and I worked on when we were much, much younger kids, includes this will include kind of coming up with the C values for not just wetland flora, but upland species as well. That then also allows for kind of the evaluation of data across different community types. So you're not just restricted to wetland communities, but you can actually look at, say, dry prairies and forest systems and the like. The other thing is it follows the nomenclature of min-taxa. I don't know how many people here actually have the battle of dealing with the federal system with Cartez, but in our shop, we utilize min-taxa, so it's based off of flora of North America. The C value scale is quite different too. Well, not quite different. It's 0 to 10, but the terminology or the definitions used to categorize the species is somewhat different. So you have to refer back to that, to the original document to see the difference. But this is the one that we've gone with. So this is a product that's actually been completed, and this is the folks that work on it. So these folks have primarily been involved in this long-term prairie monitoring effort associated with the DNR. There's a couple different monitoring efforts going on right now, but these are the people who've really kind of been involved for the most part. So the next plan, so Jason will be helping with some of the next stuff. So the next plan will be doing the Laurentian mixed forest, followed by the eastern broadleaf forest. All right, here's just kind of some data that put together last minute that I thought would be of interest. So these are based off of relevaes. So the relevaes are a little different than, say, the random meander survey. The random meander survey may end up encountering more species than, say, a releve. These are releve plots. Everyone familiar with releve plots? So in an open system, it's a 10 by 10 meter plot. So this would be a site, say, in southwest. This is a site I did in Yellow Medicine County. And kind of comparing the prairie values on the left column here versus the old values. And this is the full system versus kind of the PCA system of the rapid. So you see a discrepancy, obviously, in the number of species that are considered to determine your mean C. The other thing that you see is a big difference through a number of these different evaluations in the Floristic Quality Index itself. So this is just one system. Here's another one. Here's a calcareous fen up in Red Lake County. Pretty rich species-wise. One thing I will point out, in the original development of the sea values, certain species were excluded, maybe because the Army Corps or the federal list at that time, I think that was Fish and Wildlife Service, did not consider a species like Saldago nemoralis as a wetland species. But if you work in the western part of the state, you're definitely going to find it in wet prairie systems and calcareous fen systems. So that would explain the discrepancy here between the 51 and the 49. And here is your, if you were to go with the rapid meander survey for the list, it excludes over half the species we're actually dealing with. And you see a pretty large discrepancy in the overall index value. Here's another one of a fen in southwest Minnesota, Renville. And you do see once again, the discrepancy in the index value. The C values will vary, but I think we'll talk about this a little bit later.
Scott, sorry, so the data on the left is the relevate, and then the data on the right is the meander?
Well, it's actually taking what you're available to look at in the rapid list.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So we didn't do a random meander on that. It was just a stripped down list. And hopefully I didn't exclude anything, but this is all manual. So I had to go through that list one by one. So in this situation, you do see a discrepancy in the index as well. Here's a wet prairie. This is just an open wet prairie subtype of the wet prairie system. Once again, the discrepancy in the index value. Another example. So you can kind of see where I'm headed at this. I'm pushing for full FQA in general. I think it's a great metric, and I have nothing better to do with my time. I'm not racing around. Here's another one of a southern Seabridge meadow carr community. And once again, a difference in the index. Here's one of the forested peatland. This is a system dominated by tamarack in the northwest part of the state. And once again, the index value is quite different. So the values, though, I will interject, the values from the overall statewide project to this, they slightly vary. There is a difference, but moving forward, people should probably use this. Now, in terms of the scale of what's high, medium, and low, with what the PCA is suggesting, I can't comment on that. Because the values, it's not apples to apples. So the particular case study that we're talking about today involved a linear corridor project. Back in the day, we were hired to do invasive species surveys. So in those days, you didn't have to do rare plant surveys everywhere, as Jason will attest to. It's basically where the DNR says there's a hit. If someone has not worked in a certain area, the DNR, for instance, and there's no hits, then they don't require surveys. That was kind of how they operated. To this day, they probably operate a little bit like that. So we ended up coming upon some calcareous fens up in this part of the state, and it was a project moving forward, and so they had to figure out what to do. Historically, this was a pretty large peatland complex, probably a mosaic of wet prairie, open peatland, wet meadow, maybe forested peatland, they're mixed. A lot of ditching and draining for agricultural purposes. This particular site, there was an attempt to create a ditch somewhat similar to Pioneer Park that Jason talks about, and then they bailed on it. So this particular ditch reminds you a lot about a calcareous fen. So it has all the fen indicators in there. It's quite amazing. And it's surrounded by wet prairie that's somewhat degraded. The client opted to go through this fen, and as part of that, they had to do a fen management plan, which in the fen management plan proposed monitoring. The problem is we didn't collect baseline data. We weren't really part of that negotiation. So we're coming into this trying to scramble and figure out, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to meet these metrics that have been set that are really kind of arbitrary? And Jessie will go into that. But part of that management plan included doing hydrologic monitoring as well as both vascular plant and bryophyte sampling. We will not talk about bryophyte sampling because it's painful and not very entertaining. So with that, I'll have Jessie take over.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go into more detail about how we applied the FQA in this particular project. And like Scott said, we weren't involved with the setup or the release criteria. It was just kind of handed over to us. So this specific language is straight from the Fen management plan. I'm not even fully sure who developed it, but it does establish, so it has transects. So there's first one transect with 6 sampling plots within the ditch fen, and 4 of those are within the construction right-of-way, so that would be like the impact area. And then 2 are outside of the construction corridor, so those are serving as the control plots, even though there's no pre-construction data. And then there were 3 additional transects established outside of the ditch fen within the wet prairie community. And so within each of those transects, there's 3 within the corridor and then 2 outside of the corridor. So total, we're looking at 21 sample plots, 6 in the ditch fen and then 15 outside of that. It's probably easier just to look at it like that.
And did you say those were 10 meters by 10 meters?
No,
that
so
would be for relevant. These, we'll get into that.
Yes, so it just said plots though, nothing specific.
Yeah.
So here you can see on the aerial where the construction corridor went through. And then you can also see this is the ditch fen. So that's the transect of the ditch fen. And then you can see, so the plots within the corridor, those are the, we just call them corridor or impacted. And then these are the control plots. And so the release criteria, straight from the Fen management plan, is here. So and this would basically be the threshold at which the client is released from further monitoring. So they're looking at when the plant distribution data indicate that the on right-of-way plant distribution within the disturbed area of the ditch fen is within 80% of the off right-of-way plant distribution. So for me, I read it a few times, I'm like, is this really, what is this saying? Like, what's the plant distribution? What's that? So it's pretty vague, can be interpreted a lot of different ways. You know, it could be species richness, or it could be just cover of general vegetation. It's not really clear. So we just took that to mean we can do, you know, whatever we want, really. And so we decided to go with the FQA. I wasn't involved at the time of the initial decision, but it makes sense because it's a standardized method that can be applied to different sampling techniques, you know, plots or meander surveys, and it's pretty objective. And then also those metrics like the mean C, they're really responsive to disturbance, which was, you know, something of interest here. And then, and you know, you can do it even if you just have a species list. You can do those calculations retroactively. So it's a pretty nice approach, we think. And then also with our FQA, having the regionalized C values. So initially it was done with the statewide wetland values, but then it allows us to still go back and swap in those prairie C values just to see you know, if that makes any difference. And so that's another plus, that you can do that with this data we collected. So specifically, how we collected the data is we had 1 by 1 meter quadrats at each sample plot. And then we weren't able to permanently mark the plots because it's in a pipeline easement, so it's kind of undergoing a lot of activity frequently, and it's on private property, and so just we weren't confident that those would be maintained. And so we had to use GPS to relocate those plots. And then within each quadrant, we just report all the species and then assign the cover class based on this Braun blanket scale, which is pretty similar to what's done for releves, and then also the rapid FQA. So we basically just assign the cover class, which corresponds to this range of cover, and then for the actual calculations, then we use these midpoint values. And then another quick comparison, I guess when it first started, we didn't have the rapid FQA to use, but we just wanted to compare sort of the comprehensive FQA to the rapid, just to see for this particular data set, you know, are we getting similar results, or are they really different? So for this comparison, I just used the Prairie C values, so it was an apples to apples comparison. And then just looking at the species list that we got from our years of monitoring, we had, and that was from the plot data, there were a total of 79 species that we documented, but 36 of those are not on the rapid list, so that's like a significant chunk. And I will show you the list here. So there's the first part, and there's the second part. So there's, you know, no Juncus species at all, and then also you'll notice, so like some of the key fen indicator species like Caryostyrilus and Elaeacris rostulata, a lot of those really conservative species with C values of like 9 and 10, those just are missing. So you would expect a pretty big difference there, a big drop in your mean C. And then also considering the methodology for something like this project, we really wanted something more statistically robust. So doing something like a meander survey, you're not really, that's like one data point. Whereas doing plots, you could have, you know, multiple data points. Although I think with the rapid, you probably could apply that to plot data as well. So just to compare just the general species list that we had from the monitoring years. So the green is the full FQA and the blue is the rapid. So just looking at native species richness, you know, substantially lower with the rapid as you would expect, but it's not quite tracking, you know, the same way that the full is. And then looking at the mean C values, again, the rapid is it's decreased, and it's, you know, it's relatively close, but for something like this difference in 2013, you know, a 1 point swing, I mean, that could be something where if you're looking at the condition categories for mean C, you know, that might lower the community from being considered good to like fair. So it is kind of a substantial difference, I think. And then another interesting thing was I noticed that we had this plot, which is in the ditch bend, that it only has a species richness of 3. So then I looked at it, and it's, so you see it only has 3 species, but it has a really high weighted mean C because it's dominated by Elaeacris rostulata. So if you're just looking at species richness, you might think it's a pretty low quality, you know, plot, but then having the full having all of the metrics to examine, you can see that it's actually a pretty nice plot. And then again, with the rapid FQA for this plot in particular, it doesn't have any of those 3 species on the list, so that would just get a 0. So then going further with our analysis, it was pretty well laid out with the plots and the transects. So just stratifying our plots by the community type, so having the 6 plots in the ditch fen, and then the other in the wet prairie. And then just comparing between the corridor or the impacted plots versus the control plots. And then looking at those metrics, native species richness and the weighted mean C, we factored in invasive species there, so those get a value of 0 in that calculation. And then the FQI, which combines those 2 metrics. So first looking at FQI, in the wet prairie, there was variability year to year, but not significantly so, and I've got the sample sizes here just to know. So in this case, if you're looking at that initial release criteria and you're looking at FQI, you've got higher FQI in the corridor plots, so you would certainly be meeting that arbitrary threshold. Then looking at the ditch fen, the FQI, again, it's variable, but you only have a sample size of 2 for your control, so I don't have the error bars on here, but they're pretty big. Then looking at native species richness, again, not a whole lot of difference. And in the ditch fen, like you have that example plot that I had was in this group here, so it does look like a pretty big difference, but again, with the margin of error, it's actually not all that different, not statistically different. And then mean C, those are kind of more stable values, but year to year there's some variability. And actually in the ditch fen it's a lot higher, but again, with this really low sample size, it's not anything statistically significant year to year or between the treatments. So some conclusions were that we didn't detect any significant differences between the corridor and the control plots, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't a difference. We just couldn't detect it with the small sample size. And then another thing that might have helped would be having those permanent plots, which we didn't have. So just having more plots, again, would have been better. And then not having the pre-construction data seems a little sketchy, because you're assuming then that the off right-of-way plots are, unimpacted, which you don't know that that's necessarily the case. But overall, the FQA seems like a good tool for evaluating the data that we had for this project, because it's giving you the various metrics, as I said before, with not just species richness, but the weighted mean C, and gives you a broader picture of what's going on in these communities. And so then, just generally speaking, some recommendations for future vegetation monitoring projects would be to start early in the process of the project, not sort of after it's constructed, to set up your sampling methodology and really do as many samples as you possibly can, but you are pretty limited. For instance, in the case of this ditch fen, you can only fit so many plots in there. And then even if you can do 100 plots, you don't necessarily have time to do that monitoring effort every year. And then again, with the sampling effort, the FQI really can vary depending on the time of year that you're doing the sampling, and so you really want to restrict that to like a 2-week window and always sample within that window, because otherwise you're going to get more variability just based on what you're able to detect and, you know, just phenologically speaking. So, with that, review.
Anyone get that?
Yeah.
So I guess some comments. So the C values within the wetland area, those would have been based off the Minnesota Wetlands 2007 or
No.
the Prairie?
The Prairie.
The Prairie C
We
values.
updated it, yeah.
Okay. And when you assigned, or who assigned the Prairie C value?
That was that group that was up there.
Big group?
Yeah.
Okay, and when they formulated that, did they reference other publications out there, like, I think I mentioned before, like Swink and Wilhelm down in plants in the Chicago region, where it's still kind of upper Midwest C values, kind of associated with, you know, the Tallgrass Prairie or whatever, through the upper Midwest?
Yeah,
Are
I
any
mean,
of those kind of applicable to this
Right.
part of the upper Midwest in Minnesota here?
Well, these are based on the region that we live in. So that scale that was presented there, so if you want to go, the plants of Chicago, the C values developed there, they're going to behave much differently than up here.
Right.
So they have a lot of 10s there that up here are, you know, far less conservative.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just share with everybody, I'm aware of there's an online website, it's called universalfqa.org. Maybe some of you have heard of it or seen it, but it's a free website, and you can basically just create your own password and login and go in there and build your own FQA based off of anywhere in the country, and they have various data sets, right, or this assigned C values that you just click on the drop down, select. So if you're working in like North Dakota, I think there's some.
Yeah, North Dakota has a state
There's
list.
Minnesota wetlands, there's, if you're down in Illinois or plants in the Chicago region, and you can basically select your data that you're gonna build your FQA from. And then you'll just type in your plants that are observed within your Neander survey or data plot or whatever, and it'll just automatically do the mathematical calculation and then spit out your FQI.
Jason?
I was scanning your Prairie FQA, and just as you were presenting the numbers and the 2007 values that we came up with,
Right.
and it seemed like for a lot of those plants, there might be an adjustment of a point for a C value, up or down one way.
Right.
And that's really not significant for a species at a time, but cumulatively, that could have, per
Sure.
plot, that could have
For
quite
sure.
an impact. But then you also mentioned your revision was adding upland species, correct?
Correct.
Which didn't exist in the 2007 list. And then parsing out by nomenclature, you know, maybe newly recognized species that might.
Like Platanthera aquabonis.
Yeah, and so it's really a overhaul and cleaning up of the list.
Correct.
So the adjustment of the C value is a kind of a minor component per region. It's important, but it's this adding the uplands species and then making sure the list is more complete for that region is really what makes it more robust.
Well, yeah, and to give some backstory to this, when Jason and I were originally thinking of this concept, that was what we were pushing, if you remember, and that was what, 17 years ago, a long time ago. So that was the goal, and we're trying to get there. It just takes time, and there's not enough time. So we'll get there, though. Any other questions?
Then including like the upland species, like how many species do you guys estimate would get through that C value assignment?
There was probably a third of the species we didn't cover, right, in the state
Correct.
flora.
Right.
You know, and now those won't be in every region, but but over the whole state, we probably described C values for 2/3 of the flora of the state at the time. And then since then, there's been more species kind of broken out, refinements to.
Like rubus.
Rubus, yeah.
I don't even want to
Yeah.
touch those, but let Jason
um,
handle that.
You'd also mentioned apples and oranges, you talked about, and then you had talked about phenology. And like,
Right.
so that rapid FQA, the way it's being applied, it's like usually applied over a large scale system, like the state, like,
Right.
you know, the PCA was doing. And even that, phenologically, they're going out throughout the year and using the same methodology to sample the basins at different times of year. So
Right, that's the conundrum. I mean, everyone has to just focus on this and like,
a month period, yeah, and that's impossible.
Right.
So to think about the FQI for the rapid and the FQI for a full, those are two different, those are apples and oranges. They really are.
absolutely. And the other thing with the rapid, that approach, if I recall, your path could be different. People doing it from year to year are different, so different skill set. And like Jason said, the phenology is a key thing too. So someone who's not really comfortable in the botanical world, they might need to see a plant in its optimal identification state. Or someone else who's more experienced knows this stuff vegetatively.
I've been doing hundreds of plots in the Anoka sampling for monitoring of wetland banks, and I do mine from mid-August to mid-September, and a lot of the times, like the sedges, they were all just falling apart.
Right.
And most people would not want to do it then, but because I do it in that window every year, I can get all the Asteraceae, I can get all this late season stuff that would be absolutely impossible to identify correctly if I did it during prime
Right.
sedge
So
time.
one of the thoughts, you know, someone in our office brought this up, why not do it 2 times a year? Well, that, but I kind of question whether or not that would even, we want to do that.
No, yeah, it'd be this, yeah.
Because if you are doing cover, say a species at one point in the year is going to have limited cover versus later in the year, that same species could be fully grown. So your results will change too. So there is so much more for us to actually tackle. So we're just beginning to look at this, so we should probably think about rewriting things and how we analyze data.
The last thing I'll add is from applying this for like 10 years now with these sites is noticing that this FQI is this dance between species richness and conservatism. And I've noticed in wet meadows of the sampling, as richness increases, mean conservatism decreases quite a bit more than I thought it would. And so while you're gaining value in square root of species,
One metric.
yeah, you're losing in the mean C. And so you can be gaining 20, 30 species per plot in a wet meadow, and your FQI just stays flat because your mean C has dropped a point or two from the original. And so for a performance standard, that's a problem. If your performance standard says your FQI has to jump incrementally over the years to get your credits. And so we look at FQI, and we look at species diversity, and we look at mean C. We look at all three of those, and our metrics are built around all of those, not just the one number.
And I think that's the way we need to be looking at it. When you look at, say, baseball stats, if you guys are into that, they're not just looking at batting average anymore. I mean, they're looking at WAR, wins above replacement, OPS, and all that to evaluate things. And so I think some people want to simplify things, and I think it's better for the science, better for the professionals to look and try to collect as much data as we can and get a bigger, fuller picture of what's really going on out there. So, I mean, going into this project, it also helps that the regulatory entities are kind of thinking about what they're asking for instead of kind of leaving everyone in this mystery as to how do we reach these parameters and are we actually reaching parameters. So I think it's something that we all as a community need to discuss more and more and more. So it's great that Mike Bordash has been bringing us to this point. I think we need to keep going, and you know, Jason's a big part of that. And so best of luck to everyone out there.